In 1971, a group of psychologists picked 24 college students at random. They screened them, tested them, made sure every single one was psychologically healthy, emotionally stable, morally normal. Then they put them in a basement and watched what happened. Within 24 hours, one group was already abusing the other. Within 6 days, the experiment had to be shut down because what was happening inside that basement had stopped looking like science and started looking like something else entirely. The students who became abusers weren't broken people. They weren't sociopaths hiding behind a normal face. They were you. They were me. They were exactly the kind of person who watches a video like this and thinks, I would never do that. That's exactly what they thought too. Here's what actually happened. Philip Zimbardo, a psychologist at Stanford, wanted to understand something specific, not whether evil people do evil things. That's obvious. He wanted to know whether ordinary people could be pulled into cruelty by nothing more than a situation. So he built one. 24 students, randomly split. Half became guards, half became prisoners. The guards got uniforms, batons, and mirrored sunglasses. The kind that hide your eyes, and with them, your sense of individual identity. The prisoners were stripped, given numbers instead of names, and told to follow orders. No script, no instructions on how to behave. Zimbardo just created the conditions and stepped back. Day 1, tension, but manageable. Day 2, the guards started enjoying the power. Small humiliations, petty rules, making prisoners do push-ups for no reason. Day 3, a prisoner had a psychological breakdown and had to be released. Day 5, guards were forcing prisoners to urinate in buckets, stripping them as punishment. One guard, who the others started calling John Wayne, had developed what Zimbardo described as a genuinely sadistic streak, seemingly out of nowhere. Day 6, Zimbardo pulled the plug. 6 days. That's the number that should stay with you. Not because the experiment was extreme, but because 6 days is nothing. These weren't men broken down over months. They weren't soldiers conditioned over years. They were college students. And in less time than it takes for a bruise to heal, the situation had rewritten who they were. Zimbardo called it the Lucifer Effect, the process by which good people, ordinary, decent, psychologically healthy people, transform into instruments of cruelty. Not because of who they are, because of where they are. Now, here's where it stops being a psychology experiment and starts being a news story you remember. Abu Ghraib, 2003. Iraq. American soldiers photographing themselves torturing prisoners, forcing them into degrading positions, smiling at the camera. When the photos went public, the official response was swift and consistent. Bad apples, rogue soldiers, a few broken individuals who slipped through the screening process. Zimbardo looked at one of those soldiers, a man named Ivan Frederick, and saw something that didn't fit that story. Before Abu Ghraib, Frederick was unremarkable in every way that matters. Stable upbringing, decent EQ. No history of violence or cruelty. He was a corrections officer back home. Coached a little league team. By every psychological measure available, he was normal. The same man appeared in those photographs less than a year later. Zimbardo's argument, and this is the core of the entire book, is that Abu Ghraib didn't reveal a hidden monster inside Frederick. It revealed something about the barrel he was placed in. Bad barrel, not bad apple. The question isn't what was wrong with him. The question is what was wrong with the system that produced his behavior. And more uncomfortably, would you have been any different placed in the same system, under the same pressure, with the same cover story telling you it was necessary? Zimbardo spent decades identifying the specific forces that make ordinary people do terrible things. There are 4 that matter most, and I want you to notice as I describe each one how familiar they feel. Stanley Milgram, 1961. A Yale psychologist sets up a simple experiment. You're a participant. You're told you're testing whether electric shocks improve memory. There's a learner in the next room, strapped to a chair, wired up. Every time they give a wrong answer, you press a button that delivers a shock. The shocks escalate. The dials go from 15 volts all the way to 450. At 300 volts, the learner starts banging on the wall, begging you to stop. At 450 volts, marked on the dial as XXX, there's silence. 65% of participants pressed that button. They weren't sadists. They were teachers and factory workers and accountants who'd never hurt anyone. They kept going because a man in a lab coat said 4 words, "Please continue, it's necessary." That's what authority does to moral judgment. It doesn't destroy it, it outsources it. You stop asking, "Is this right?" and start asking, "Is this what I'm supposed to do?" The Milgram experiment didn't end in 1961. It plays out every day in offices, in institutions, in chains of command where everyone is following orders and no one is making a decision. Here's a question nobody asks out loud. Who are you when no one's watching? Not who you want to be. Who you actually are, when there are no consequences, no reputation at stake, no face attached to your actions. Zimbardo tested this with a car. He left an identical abandoned vehicle in 2 different neighborhoods. The Bronx, dense, anonymous, strangers passing strangers, and Palo Alto, tight-knit, where people knew their neighbors' faces. The Bronx car was stripped to the frame within hours. Multiple people, some of them in broad daylight. The Palo Alto car sat completely untouched for days. Same car, different level of anonymity, completely different behavior. When identity disappears through masks, uniforms, screen names, crowd psychology, something shifts in the human mind. The behavior that felt impossible when your name was attached to it becomes surprisingly easy when it isn't. Think about that the next time you're online. This is the one that has the longest body count in history. If you want to get a person to commit an atrocity against another person, you don't need to make them hate that person. You just need to make them stop seeing that person as fully human. Animals, vermin, savages, cockroaches. Every genocide in modern history was preceded by a sustained campaign of language. Before the violence came the vocabulary that made the violence imaginable. Zimbardo documented this in a lab. Albert Bandura's research showed that students gave significantly harsher punishments to groups described in dehumanizing terms, without realizing they were doing it. The language did the moral work invisibly, below the level of conscious choice. Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Look at any comment section, any political debate, anytime someone talks about a group they fear or despise. Listen to the words being used. The process didn't end, it just moved online. But wait, here's the part nobody talks about. None of the people in Zimbardo's research, none of the Milgram participants, none of the soldiers at Abu Ghraib, none of them thought they were doing something evil. That's what makes this genuinely terrifying. The Milgram participants believed they were advancing science. The Abu Ghraib soldiers believed they were protecting national security. The Stanford guards believed they were just doing their job. Every act of systemic cruelty in history has come with a cover story, a framing that makes the horror sound not just acceptable, but necessary. Even righteous, enhanced interrogation, collateral damage, final solution, pacification. The language is always sanitized, the story is always noble, and the people inside it almost never see what they're actually part of until it's over. So the next time you hear language that makes something ugly sound clean, ask yourself what that language is doing, what it's covering, what it's making possible, because that's how it always starts. Here's what I don't want you to walk away thinking. This isn't a video about how you're doomed. It's not an argument that circumstances control you, that you're just a product of whatever situation you're placed in. That free will is an illusion. That's not what Zimbardo is saying. He's saying something harder and more useful. In the Milgram experiment, some people stopped. Not a majority, but some. They stood up. They looked the authority figure in the lab coat in the eye and said, "I'm not doing this." They walked out. They weren't stronger than the others. They weren't better people by any measure you could have taken before the experiment. The only difference was a single conscious decision made at the exact moment it was hardest to make. That's the whole argument. The capacity for evil doesn't mean you're destined for it. It means you have to actively choose against it, deliberately, repeatedly, with the full knowledge that the forces pulling you the other way are real and powerful and often invisible. Knowing they exist is the only defense that actually works. Zimbardo ends his life's work not with a warning, but with a concept he calls the banality of heroism. If ordinary people can slide into cruelty through small, incremental steps, then ordinary people can also choose courage through the same small, incremental steps. No special equipment required. 2007, New York City subway platform. A man named Wesley Autry is waiting for a train when a stranger has a seizure and falls onto the tracks. The train is coming. Autry has less than a second. He jumps down, presses the man flat into the drainage trench between the rails, covers him with his body as 5 subway cars pass overhead, close enough to graze Autry's hat. When he climbed back up onto the platform, he told reporters he didn't do anything special. He just saw something that needed doing, and he did it. That's it. That's the entire formula. Heroism isn't a personality type. It's not a superpower. It's not reserved for people built differently than you. It's a decision, made in a moment, to act when every instinct is telling you to wait for someone else to go first. The people who make that decision aren't special. They've just stopped waiting for permission. Zimbardo spent 50 years studying evil, and what he found wasn't a monster hiding under the surface of society. He found a gradient. Not a line between good people and bad people. A spectrum. And every single one of us is somewhere on it, shaped by forces we can barely see, nudged in directions we don't always notice. The Stanford students didn't decide to become cruel. It accumulated. One small decision at a time. 6 days of choosing the easier thing, the expected thing, the thing the situation seemed to call for, until they were somewhere they never would have predicted at the start. That's how it works, which means the defense isn't a better personality. It's awareness. The habit of asking, why am I doing this? Who told me to? What am I not seeing in the people I'm treating this way? What story am I inside right now? And who wrote it? You are not immune to the forces Zimbardo identified. Nobody is. But you are capable of seeing them. And that, not strength, not moral superiority, not being fundamentally different from the people who fell, that is what changes the outcome. Choose deliberately. Question the story you've been handed. See the person in front of you as fully human, especially when something is making that feel difficult. That's not a lofty ideal. In a world that keeps producing the conditions Zimbardo studied, it's the only thing that actually works.